Welcome to Calibrate Conversations, a podcast about embracing God's standard for sexuality. I'm your host, Brady Cohn. I'm so glad you're here today. Today, our episode is going to take a little bit of a different side road from our normal conversations about sexuality and gender and marriage, but I think that there's some things related here. So I'll try to kind of bring it around and tie it into our normal topic of discussion. So I was really curious today when I saw some social media posts pop up and some news articles about another person in Christian ministry being canceled, and because of a report that came out about abuse. And I'm like, oh no, another one. And we've seen so many pastors, people in ministry who have fallen recently, and there's so much abuse that's happened, Steve Lawson and Robert Morris, Mike Bickle of IHOP, Michael Brown. Like there's so much abuse, and it's horrible and it's tragic. And I don't want to minimize that. And so I was, concerned when I saw that this popular podcaster was kind of being canceled. He had a podcast episode on the Sons of Patriarchy that they announced was being taken off because of this abuse report that came out. And so I really wanted to see what was going on here. So let me just give you a little bit of background info. So last fall, I did a couple of episodes. One was focused on the book, Every Man's Battle. And I talked about some of the pitfalls, some of my concerns, and about that book. But I also talked about how there's this pendulum that has been swinging to where this very strong kind of militant egalitarian crowd thinks that everything is abusive, right? And so egalitarian, if you don't know, is the theological belief that there's not differences between men and women, at least in their roles in the church and the household. And so there's a lot of underpinnings of feminism within that movement. And that's contrast with complementarianism, which believes that there are differences between men and women in the home and within the church. Complementarianism believes that the office of pastor should only be for men, and that men kind of have a responsibility in their home for leadership within their home and sacrificial leadership. There's a lot of complementarianism that has been used abusively. And then there's other forms of kind of viewing marriage and leadership, kind of very strong patriarchy that I think is pretty wrong, that takes things to the extreme. And so many times when people on the egalitarian side are calling out the abuses that they say are within complementarianism, they're actually really talking about patriarchy, and they kind of lump, complementarianism and patriarchy into the same category. And of course, they're only calling out the extremes on the patriarchy side. So there's been kind of these things brewing within evangelicalism. And last fall, when I did this episode on, this book, Every Man's Battle, I said, man, I think that this is right to call these things out because I see these same issues within this book, and I think it's kind of dangerous. But I said a lot of the people calling it out are these very, very militant egalitarians who, and I don't want to confuse those with maybe normal egalitarians. Like I love egalitarian friends. I don't think it's a salvation issue. I disagree with their theology, but then there's a very extreme side of it that I would call militant egalitarians that kind of read abuse into every situation. And so they claim to be advocating for the vulnerable, for the weak, for the abuse victims, which obviously I'm for that, right? Like I hate abuse when it happens. We need to be advocates for, the less powerful, and anyone who is abused, whether it's in marriage or within churches. Like we should advocate against abuse, like hands down, no questions asked. But I see that crowd that it seems like is doing the most advocating against abuse also takes things so far that they read abuse into every situation, and they think that everything is abusive. And my episodes I did on that last fall with about every man's battle, and I did another one on kind of the fragility of our current generation that feels like everything is abusive. I got kind of some pushback and some heat for that, but also some really good conversation. And I saw a lot of people who are navigating these situations. And I heard from pastors who believe that they've been put in situations where they just can't win, right? Because they're complementarians, but they're accused of being abusive, and they try to walk with grace in hard situations in their church. And with the people who are accusing everyone of being abusive, it feels like they just can't win. Nothing they do is ever good enough or right. And there's a kind of a crowd that feels like they're always the victims. And so I really see that in some of the militant egalitarian crowd, is that they're always the victims and you can't do anything right. And they always feel like they're unsafe and being abused. Well, so there's this current news story again with this report that just came out, and someone who's kind of being canceled now, that I think really reiterates what I was talking about there and puts it on full display. So this person who just had this report come out about his abuse is Tim Whitaker. So Tim is the founder of a online YouTube channel called The New Evangelicals. So Tim is kind of a leader within the deconstruction movement of deconstructing your faith, questioning everything about your faith. I think that overall deconstruction is dangerous and leads people to abandon their faith completely. There's some people who argue with that. They'd say that deconstruction is a good thing, that it's actually finding the authentic, real Christianity. There's a lot that could be debated on there. I did an episode a while back with Tim Barnett talking about deconstruction, so you should check out that episode. He's of the Red Pin Logic. That was a great episode. And so, Tim is a leader of a movement that some people refer to them as ex-evangelicals or ex-evangelicals. They're no longer evangelicals, but they're trying to hold onto their faith. They've rejected some of the tenets of the faith. And what I see it leading to is a lot of people who are very progressive Christians, like, LGBTQ affirming Christians, and many people who walk away from Christianity completely, who have really twisted scripture and don't have an understanding of the gospel. So let me say that I don't believe that the deconstruction movement is healthy. There's probably, I'm sure, some people who say that they've deconstructed and they've come to a good place, love Jesus. That's great. I don't want to deny their journey there, but overall, I don't think the deconstruction movement is taking people to a healthy or a good place with their faith. So enter in Tim Whitaker, this ministry called The New Evangelicals. He has this popular YouTube channel. Here is Tim's bio from his New Evangelicals website. It says, growing up, Tim always felt at home in evangelical spaces until years later when his studying and questions caused him to no longer be welcomed in his church community. Brokenhearted but undeterred, Tim continued to pursue a deeper understanding of faith, history, theology, and the evangelical church. The more he uncovers, the more he realizes the importance of advocating for the marginalized in the church, exploring the full depth and breadth of Christian faith traditions, and holding toxic churches and leaders accountable. All right, so there's a lot in that statement. So he's kind of a deconstructionist. He supports deconstruction, questioning everything about your faith. He's now very firmly egalitarian. He kind of falls into that camp of calling out abusers. Again, that's a good thing. I don't want to say that that's a bad thing, but then also maybe reading abuse into everything, which is kind of what that camp of Christianity seems to be doing. And so I was very, very concerned and intrigued when I saw the headlines just last night today that there was a report that came out about his abuse. And so I was thinking, oh gosh, like what has he done? Was he sexually abusing someone? Was there a sexual assault? And because gosh, that's the type of thing he speaks out against so much. It's just like I can't believe it. So I did some research, found the report, and I was really astounded at what happened. Right, I couldn't really believe at what this whole report was about. So the whole report, 94 pages, was about an incident between him and a young woman, I believe in her 20s, who was working for him, helping write some of the scripting for his podcast. So it turns out that other podcasters have people write their scripts for them. So I don't, but some people do that. And so there's this whole incident between Tim and this woman, Adele Mulford, who was working for him. And the whole incident evolved around he was driving too aggressively in his car with her. It's like, oh gosh, how dare he? So it's like, okay, there has to be more to it than that. This whole 94-page report came out from this organization called GRACE, which stands for Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment. So I've seen GRACE step into a lot of different situations. Many times when there's accusations of abuse in a church, they're called in to do a formal investigation. And so they did this whole investigation into the new evangelicals and this incident between Tim Whitaker and this employee. And so I'll read a little bit about the report and a few quotes. It said that this report detailed behavioral misconduct between Tim Whitaker, the creator and facilitator of New Evangelicals. The report followed an investigation by Grace, the allegations that Tim Whitaker created an unsafe working situation for the New Evangelicals contract employee. All right, so this whole thing was about a driving incident. So I as I tried to understand it and I read online about it, I looked through this, parts of this 94-page report. Turns out that Tim was supposed to pick up this employee. They were supposed to drive like a 40-minute drive to this place where a podcast episode was being recorded or some video was being recorded that he was working on. And this employee was helping prepare the script for that, right? And so she was running way late. And so he waited and waited. Finally, she came out, got in his car. They drove like the 40 miles and he was running late. And she is accusing him of driving too aggressively. I have a hard time not laughing because this sounds so ridiculous. Like her entire account was that he drove too aggressively trying to get there. And so this whole incident was detailed. Again, sorry, I'm really trying not to laugh, but I can't really help it. And so I know I'm laughing at someone's abuse. How dare I? I'm minimalizing their pain. Like, yes, I am. I'm sorry.
How dare you?
They had this whole drive where she claims that he was like changing lanes aggressively. It's like, gosh, I live outside Seattle. Like, there's crazy drivers everywhere. I'm always saying that people are changing lanes too aggressively. So maybe she has a point, but that he was going too fast, that he said a cuss word while he was driving. It's like, I admit I have sometimes some road rage issues. My wife hates it. I'm trying to work on that, keep my composure, not let my emotions get the best of me. And sometimes I've uttered a cuss word while driving. Sometimes I do that when I'm driving alone.
Only I didn't say fudge.
It's like, gosh, I need a change of heart there. I need the gospel to do some work in my life. I need to put death to my former self. I'm trying to work on that area of my life of letting these emotions control me. And so I understand her, obviously concern there, but they went this entire trip and she didn't say anything. She just sat there and then she said that he was obviously seemed kind of upset that obviously they were running way late because of her. And so, they got there, they did the whole thing. later, within like a week, he asked her like if everything was okay, and she said yes. But then later, I think it was a couple weeks after this incident, she reached out to a member of the board of directors of the organization, the New Evangelicals, and complained about this incident. And so, and they start this whole investigation. And so she is like claiming that this was a form of abuse and made her feel unsafe. And the report from Grace, 94 pages on just this one incident, said that Whitaker committed behavioral misconduct in the form of verbal, nonverbal, and physical acts that are improper, including a lack of self-control, controlling behaviors, and holding double standards. It cited the power dynamics between Whitaker and Wolford as contributing factors to this conclusion. All right, so I think that this is just insane. And so after this then incident, they started this whole investigation. After Tim realized that there was a problem, he apologized, and that wasn't good enough. And so they went to mediation. But then she said that she felt uncomfortable with a mediation because she thought that like he was maybe friends with a mediator. And so several months later, she ended up quitting and no longer working for the New Evangelicals. And so the report made several recommendations to the New Evangelicals, and amongst them was funding to assist Mulford in her healing process from the experience, an assessment of the New Evangelicals' governing structure, and continuation of work to decenter Whitaker as the New Evangelicals' primary personality, something the organization had already recognized as a need, but had been slow to address. So I think that this is ludicrous. Like, I've ridden with people where it's like, all right, I don't want to ride with this person again. It was way too aggressive. Like they're a horrible driver, or they committed road rage. It's like, okay, maybe they need to do some work in their heart. But to have a 94-page report on this one incident, I think is insanity. And it's like, this is a he said, she said. It's like, no, she said he was driving too fast. Like, do they know how fast he was driving? Like, no, there's no documentation. It wasn't mentioned. He says he was driving normally, like he normally drives. And maybe that's, too erratic. Maybe he drives unsafe. Like that's definitely a possibility. But he says he was driving normally. She says he was driving too fast, and he was too aggressive with his lane changes and said a cuss word. And that whole thing warranted a 94-page report with these recommendations that they need to fund her continued healing process from this incident. One of the things that I found intriguing was the continued use of the term like power dynamics. Like she felt unsafe because of the difference in power dynamics, because he was a man, she was a woman, and then he was her boss. And it's like, I see that so much, like this factor of power dynamics, and it's used to portray abuse and this feeling of feeling unsafe. And if there's a difference in power dynamics, then all of a sudden something that would be an annoyance is all of a sudden abusive and traumatic and toxic. And I just think we have such a weak generation of people. And I think that this is showing where our generation is currently at. So I wanted to just share a few observations. Every good pastor has a 3-point sermon, and I'm not a good pastor, and so I don't have a 3-point sermon, but I do have a few observations. First of all, with this egalitarian crowd, you just can't win. Like everything is abusive. And I want to say, like, don't get me wrong. Like, we need to take abuse seriously. And there's been so many fallen pastors, Steve Lawson recently, Michael Brown, Mike Bickle, who was with IHOP, Robert Morris, who was just charged with sexual abuse of a child from about 40 years ago, and these things had been covered up, right? There wasn't accountability in place for these people like it should have been. And that's wrong. We need to change that. Too much is swept under the rug with pastors, people in ministry, Christian leaders. But I think that some of the response now of reading abuse into every situation is an overcorrection, and it completely misses the gospel. I think it's missing the gospel. It's not applying the gospel. For this specific situation with Tim, I think, gosh, if you don't like his driving, if it makes you uncomfortable, then just say next time, I'm taking my own vehicle, or like quit, like no longer work for him. I don't think that this is this big issue of abuse. And this is where I think that we are misusing the word abuse. And it really then undermines real abuse situations and takes away their credibility. And I think that an organization like Grace has a lot of legitimate abuse to investigate, and we're wasting that resource on an incident that I don't think that should be called abuse. And then I think for me, it takes away the credibility of an organization like this. And many times I see in people calling for accountability of organizations with abuse, taking the recommendations like an organization like Grace as the gospel of you have to do everything that they recommend if you're going to take abuse seriously. And I just think that that's missing the mark. That's taking away the role of the actual organizations of the leader or leaders of the organization, or the leaders of a church. And so I don't think that we should give complete power and control and to an organization like Grace and just take everything they say as being the gospel truth and doing every recommendation that they have. Second observation is that I think that Tim is a victim of his own theology. Like, I don't agree with Tim on most things that he teaches, right? I'm glad that he wants to be an advocate for the oppressed. I obviously believe in that, but I think that he's part of this crowd that is reading abuse into every situation. I think he's leading people astray with his progressive Christianity and progressive theology. And I think that he's wrong, and I don't agree with him on anything there. I still think that in this case, he's a victim. Like, he's a victim of this militant egalitarian cancel culture that makes everything abusive. And that is not Grace. It is missing the gospel. And it's kind of ironic that he's part of that crowd. And so it seems like with that camp of Christianity, like I said, you just can't win. I think it's kind of a self-imploding crowd. And they're going to implode on themselves because they're kind of eating their own, because it's not sustainable. And so it's interesting that he is kind of a victim of his own theology there. I still feel sorry for him in this moment. And I think he's being treated unfairly, and he's being canceled. His podcast episodes are being taken down from different podcasts that he's been on, like Sons of Patriarchy. And so we should pray that maybe this is a moment where, God reveals to him maybe where he's been wrong in some places, and that, this wouldn't further push him away from Christianity, but that he would be more open to the truth, and that he would be shown grace by some people who could help him, go in the right direction. Lastly is this. I think that this is the result of such a fragile generation. Like, everything can be so off balance, and we've clearly had previous generations that did not hold people accountable. And that's why we have the Steve Lawson situation and Mike Bickle and Michael Brown. But now we're so off balance to where everything is abuse. And, previously, I grew up in a time which wasn't that long ago, and it was somewhat the place where you couldn't talk about feelings. And that was wrong. Like, I could have benefited from talking about my feelings at times. But now we're swinging the pendulum to where everything is about feelings. I'd really recommend the book bad therapy that really goes into how our therapeutic responses of talking about feelings with everything has been a pendulum swing that is causing a lot of fragility amongst our young people, to where they can't handle hard situations, to where they feel like everything is toxic. And so I think I see that in this situation where this professional career person in her 20s can't handle a situation to where someone's driving makes her feel uncomfortable. Like, she didn't even express it while he was driving, because she said she didn't feel comfortable bringing it up. She just sat there quietly, and then she didn't feel comfortable talking to him, afterwards. So she lied about it. And then now it is abusive. So that's the result of this current generation that has overcorrected and makes everything about feelings, makes everything, needs a therapeutic response, and everything is toxic, right? And so I want to end with that, how this plays into sexuality and marriage. Well, I see that marriage and sexuality is a hard thing for our younger generation right now, because they've bought into this everything is toxic, everything is abusive, and we can't work through hard things. And in previous generations, there's way too many women who were forced to stay in abusive marriages because they had no choice, right? And that's horrible, right? Like, abuse should always be taken extremely seriously. We need advocates for abuse victims. But now, like, we see, divorce is happening everywhere amongst younger people, and technically they say that divorce rates are down, but it's actually because people just aren't getting married to begin with. And I see this creeping into the church, where people aren't getting married partially because they can't handle dying to themselves and working through hard things. It's like, gosh, I'm trying to work through anger issues. Like, seriously, I've seen for a long time, I have some anger issues, and I'm in a hope group that my church does that is applying the gospel to anger issues. This group is specifically for people with anger, and it's so amazing how the gospel is being applied to that area of my life. But this morning I woke up, and on the wrong side of the bed, I'd been stewing on some things, and I snapped at my wife when she first walked downstairs as I was cooking breakfast, and I took her to lunch, and I apologized. I'm so thankful for a wife that's full of so much grace. Like, marriage is hard, raising kids is hard, and I worry for my generation and younger that we're going to continue to fail at this because we're so fragile that we can't do hard things. And I'm so thankful for my wife to have the strength to not tolerate, but help me work through my own junk, right? And be uncomfortable sometimes, but be strong and resilient, to where we as a married couple can work through hard moments. And she's willing to show me grace and willing to push me forward and apply the gospel to my life. I think that current generation is just lacking strength. Ephesians 6:10 says, finally be strong in the Lord, in the strength of his might. And it's strength in the Lord in which we can survive parenting that is really, really difficult. It's in strength in the Lord that we can work through hard things in marriage. And I'm so grateful for a wife who has that strength and shows me so much grace, to where she's works through hard things in our marriage and helped me work through hard areas of my life that I need some transformation and repentance, right? But when we're so fragile, and when everything is toxic and abusive, and we can't handle anything, if there's these so-called differences in power dynamics, then we can't accomplish great things for God. We don't have the strength to do it. We just kind of cower and claim to be the victim. And that's what I see in this situation with Tim Whitaker. And it's unfortunate. It's the result of some of his own theology. But if we're going to embrace God's standard for sexuality and marriage, like we need to grow a foundation in Christ in which we are strong, in which we can work through hard moments in our church, in our ministries we're involved in our marriages, in which we turn to the strength of the Lord because this person has some rough edges. And so, but I have everything I need in Jesus and I am strong. So I can be part of the solution. I can show them grace. I can apply the gospel. I can call them out when needed, but I am strong enough to do that. And then if you're working for a ministry where, your boss's driving habits make you uncomfortable, you just quit and get a different job, right? We should have the strength to do that without a 94-page report from an organization. So I think that's where we're at as a culture. And I think these are the things we need to be looking out for and we need to be aware of, and we need to be aware in our own lives. Am I drawing on the strength of the Lord? Am I developing a faith of resiliency, of strength, to where I can work through hard moments, to where I have such a solid foundation that I am unshakable? That's the type of Christian the world needs. Christians who are strong enough to protect people, to protect the vulnerable, to protect people from abuse, to step in and stop abusers, but at the same time, Christians who are strong enough to be resilient and not feel like everything makes me unsafe and that everything is toxic and that we need to cancel anyone who makes me feel unsafe, even for something like his driving habits. All right, so that's where we're at. It's a bizarre story, but I think it is really telling for where we're at as a culture. And it is very indicative of what I am seeing in the world of sexuality, marriage, culture, and the church right now. So I hope that we can evaluate as the church where we're at with this. How do we create strong people that can stand up against abuse? How do we create structures that hold people accountable to abuse? But also know what abuse is and what abuse isn't, and have the wisdom and discernment to be able to tell the difference and to navigate these situations well. Once again, I think that we'd be better off if probably we had less parachurch ministry and more ministry that happened in the church under the leadership of elders. I understand the full irony of the fact that I am in parachurch ministry and I have been for a long time, but I think that we need more ministry that's under the leadership of godly, biblically qualified elders who can discern these situations and not cover for themselves and not cover up abuse of one another, because I know that obviously happens too. And that's why we've had so many pastors who have had abuse hidden for decades. But I would say that they're not under the authority of biblical eldership if it's being covered up like it has been so many times. So, all right, well, I could ramble all day and you're probably tired of listening to it. So I want to just maybe end in a moment of prayer. Dear Lord, I pray that as Christians, we can be discerning. I pray that we can have wisdom. I pray that we can have strength. I pray that people who are in abusive situations can get out, that they can have a voice, that they can have strength. I pray that the right people would come along beside them and help them find healing and help them find the gospel, and that abusers would be held accountable. But also, Lord, I pray that we as a Christian culture wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, that we would have discernment, that we wouldn't overcorrect. Help us have discernment about the people who are overcorrecting and who are calling everything abusive. And I pray that we can be a generation that raises men and women who are strong, who have their strength built on you, who can navigate uncomfortable, hard situations and apply the gospel to it. I pray that we'll have discernment in our marriages to apply the gospel, to show grace, to be strong, to push our husbands and wives forward and being a part of their sanctification. I thank you for the people listening. I pray that they are experiencing your grace today. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you check out calibrateministries.com for more resources and go listen to more episodes. Listen to those episodes from last fall that I referenced. Check out calibrateministries.com. If you're in a position to support the ministry, really appreciate it if you would do that. We are funded by donors who give sacrificially, and we appreciate every single sacrifice that they make so that we can do what we do. Thank you so much for joining us.